Both Bitcoin and Ethereum have recently completed a move that is absolutely crucial and effectively confirms that we will be going into an alt season. Now, of course, there are no guarantees in life, but what we have seen has been essentially the precursor to every preceding alt season. So I want to talk a little bit about that and effectively explain what we're doing right now, as I would say we are essentially in like a step 2 of a 3 to maybe 4 step process in terms of getting to alt season, or I guess through an alt season. So I want to talk about all of that. We've got a lot to go over today. And the big thing I want to talk about right now is discussing the crypto bubbles, because we can see here over the past week an absolutely insane move. Of course, we're seeing a lot of green everywhere, but the really important piece here that we'll kind of have a chart to look at in a bit more detail is, look at this, Bitcoin up about 5.4%. Ethereum up 28%. Now, of course, we have some others. If you're just looking in terms of raw percentage gains, things are looking, kind of green everywhere, right? But this is the really key thing, is that we are seeing Ethereum massively outperform Bitcoin. And also, somewhat interestingly, Solana's only up about 17%. And so this is why I'm saying we are in step 2 of what I would call up to a 4-step process here. Now, again, we'll get into this in a little bit just to kind of talk more clearly about what I'm meaning here. But it's really important to understand that Ethereum is outperforming basically all of the other big coins within the market. We saw Solana kind of have some of its alt season, or like its own rotations earlier on, but that was ultimately in a Bitcoin season where Bitcoin was outperforming everything over the course of basically more than a couple of weeks. So if we take a look here, we can see that the Ethereum chart is actually kind of pinched between two really key levels. The first one being a massive move that we've seen breaking above this 4,100 level. We have not actually seen Ethereum do this at all this cycle. We saw it get close, or actually we saw it hit this level in March of 2024. We also saw it hit this level twice again in December, again when we were kind of having that other little mini alt rotation. We have not actually seen Ethereum break above this level at all this cycle, which is really important. The other next important thing that we are looking for here is we are getting very close to getting up to Ethereum's all-time high. Of course, we need to see Ethereum break its all-time high in order to kind of continue this plan of having alt season play out as expected, but we're getting very close. Now, of course, things have run very crazy. In the past week, we're seeing ETH up about 30%, which is of course a major gain. So it would not be necessarily the end of the world if we saw Ethereum kind of consolidate out within this range. That'd actually be incredibly good news. We could even see it potentially come back as low as like this, maybe like 3,300 level here. Potentially we could see it come back down to this level, but consolidating anywhere kind of above this range, or even up in kind of around this range, I think would be very good to see for Ethereum. And then of course we wanted to continue to break highs and then potentially see, kind of some new highs from there. We've seen calls from anything from 6,000 to 7,500 to 10,000 to 12,000 to, some people getting somewhat outlandish and calling like 20,000 Ethereum price targets. So of course we'll have to see, time will tell, but this is exactly what we've been wanting to see, is Ethereum showing strength, and sustained strength. Now, the next thing that I want to take a look at here is Ethereum relative to Bitcoin, because not only is Ethereum showing strength good, but Ethereum showing strength relative to Bitcoin has always been kind of a major precursor to alt season coming. And what we can see here is, of course, we saw that things bottom out around April and coming into May, and then we've seen a really strong and sustained move coming up. Now, of course, there's been several levels of resistance. This 0.026 range was kind of the major one. We also kind of ran into a decent level of resistance at the 0.032 range, but now we're just kind of moving right along, currently at 0.038, maybe seeing a little bit of wicking, maybe getting a little bit of rejection here. As I had mentioned, this kind of quick succession of 3 different levels of resistance between the 0.037 and the 0.04 range, this is essentially going to be the really difficult part to get through. Once we make it through here, I think we could see a sustained move to the upside. And again, kind of similarly to what we're seeing here on the Ethereum chart, it would not surprise me if we saw a little bit of some kind of chopping around in this area, just because there is a lot of both support and resistance here. And then maybe we could see a continued move to the upside. Of course, again, we have no idea knowing for sure what's going to happen, but we are seeing, of course, continuing the higher highs, higher lows, general uptrend here, which is really good to see. Now, it is important to note we are seeing the ETH Bitcoin get a little bit overheated here. When we saw it get overheated, really overheated here, we did see it do a little bit of some consolidationary period. So there is the possibility that we see that happen here as well. And then also if we go in and we quickly add in Bollinger Bands as well as the RSI here, you will see a similar type of thing on Ethereum, that we are also getting just a little bit overheated, nothing too crazy, but we are definitely kind of showing overextended on both. So again, another level of consolidation could potentially be a worthwhile if we do kind of see that. Now, the other major thing that I wanted to talk about, again, as it relates to Altseason, is the move of the total 2. Now, total 2 does include Ethereum, so maybe we can take a look at total 3 as well to see kind of what that's looking like, which excludes Ethereum. But if you look at Ethereum, we are now, or at the total 2 market cap, excuse me, you could see that we've actually now broken the high from what we saw back in November. So altcoins, or I guess this was December, early December. But we are now seeing that altcoins are now more valuable, or actually kind of equally valuable or equivalently valuable to what we saw back when we saw that alt season run in December. More on that here in a second, because in December things got quite overheated. We haven't really seen things get so overheated, at least quite yet. Obviously things are a little frothy, things are a little euphoric, but they're not like truly overheated in the same capacity that they were here. So if we go and take a look, we can see we are moving into this zone that I've been talking about for months. And that is this very, very high, essentially like liquidity zone where we are essentially breaking all-time highs or getting very close to breaking all-time highs. This blue line is the all-time high for the total 2 market cap of crypto. So if we do break above this, we effectively would have broken new all-time highs and could potentially be off into price discovery. Now, again, we saw a little bit of some kind of consolidation, some retracing here. There is always that possibility that we can potentially, maybe wick back, pull back, see a little bit of some retrace, and then another bounce. That is always a possibility here. But things, again, from a structural level, looking really, really good. Again, a continued kind of uptrend that we are seeing here as well. So really, really strong moves happening for the the total 2. Again, however, we are seeing the market is getting a little overheated. Again, whenever we see this on the daily, you should take note. We are seeing a little bit overheated or overbought on the RSI, and a little bit overheated from the Bollinger Bands as well, overextending past kind of that outside range. So everything kind of showing that we may see a little bit of a retrace coming. Again, we just have to be careful. There is one key kind of pivot point that we could see coming up that could cause this retrace, and that would be the PPI data, which comes out tomorrow as of this recording. So, potentially the PPI, we are seeing a forecast of 0.2. We'll have to see what happens here. But this can obviously, kind of fairly dramatically impact the movement happening within crypto, because a lot of, I think, the kind of euphoric, movement that we've seen in a lot of the bullish sentiment is because there's essentially a 99.9% chance that the Fed will cut rates in September. I think this is due a lot due to some of the inflation data that came back. There's a lot of some stuff going on with like the jobs. There's just, it does seem at this point that there is basically kind of it's now time to cut rates. And so I do think that we will see that happen potentially in September. Who knows for sure, but again, that's kind of what a lot of the market is moving off of. Now, if we also take a look here, you can see we are pushing at all-time highs on the total 2. We are not even in alt season. When we were pushing all-time highs on the total 2, it was basically at this point when we were showing to be in alt season. We kind of briefly moved into it and then came right back. Also, you'll be able to see the move essentially from just outside of Bitcoin season straight into alt season basically happened within the span of 15 days. A super, super crazy, and I would say somewhat unsustainable move, as we obviously saw. Here, if we look, this has been a much more sustained climb to the upside, which I do think is a good thing to see. And we also haven't actually seen any jumping into this altcoin season yet. Now, of course, if we see altcoins continue to perform like this, there is always that possibility that we do see a jump into an altcoin season based off of this indicator. But at least for right now, things are looking relatively okay, and we are seeing a much more decent structure kind of developing around what we're seeing in many, many different metrics that we did not have back in December. So that's the really important thing. However, of course, as we have noted, there are many, many different metrics looking overextended. That's not to say things are going to crash, but that does mean that we could potentially see a little bit of some consolidation. And if you look right here, usually the market is wrong, right? Usually the average of the market, we can see the vast majority of people closing shorts and entering longs, which does actually make me a little bit nervous that we might be seeing a little bit of some pulling back going on here, just because so many longs are starting to stack up. If we also look at the liquidation map, you could see the same exact thing here with Bitcoin. We've always seen that this chart does not lie. It is always right, and it always moves in the direction of the most leverage to be liquidated. So if you look here, currently about 4.2 billion to the downside, about 2.59 billion to the upside. If we look at the 7-day, you can see a much larger number of about 14 billion to the downside here, with only about 4.7 billion to the upside. So again, this is a very, very kind of a uneven or unbalanced type of leverage or liquidation chart here. And then if we see on the 30-day, you'll see something somewhat equivalent with about 6.3 billion in leverage to the upside, and then about 15 billion in leverage to the downside. So I think there is a lot showing us that we could potentially see a little bit of a move to the downside, maybe a little bit of some cooling off within the alt market, as well as kind of, maybe some ETH Bitcoin. We see this start to cool off a little bit. There's a lot of different things that could potentially happen here. What we are looking, and so essentially what I'm looking to see is I'm looking to see the structure hold. If we do start to pull back, if we start to cool off, if we see any of this, that's okay in my book. But what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see this structure hold. I'm looking to see this structure hold. I'm looking to see this structure hold. All of this stuff is what we would be looking to see, even if we do see a little bit of a retrace. There's plenty of space for us to retrace. As I mentioned, kind of even best case scenario, we could drop back down to below $4,000, bounce around in here, come right back, and still, I think, be in an okay situation. Same thing here, we could even kind of bounce back to this level of support at the 0.32 range. Okay. We could come all the way back to the 1.27 trillion range and technically be okay. I think ideally though, kind of staying above this 1.34 trillion range would be best for altcoins. So, what we'd have to see here. But overall, hopefully you could see that this looks very, very different from what we saw back in December and November, when we saw kind of a little bit more of an unsustainable, more manufactured push to the upside, where right now, a lot of it seems to be a lot more fundamental driven. The market is a lot more healthy in terms of structure. There's a lot more things kind of coinciding, showing that we could see this really strong move. And so that's where I want to wrap this video up, is talking about kind of the stages that I referred to earlier on in the video. Now, of course, I did talk about 4 stages. The first one is essentially the longest one, and that is Bitcoin season. That's essentially where Bitcoin is moving up and up and up and up, outperforming basically all else. Then we start to move into step 2, which is kind of the ETH rotation, right? So Bitcoin, essentially the Bitcoin dominance tops. That does not mean that Bitcoin tops, it means Bitcoin dominance tops. And then we start to see rotations into Ethereum. We start to see Ethereum move up, and then that's kind of where we start to enter step 3, which I personally would call the beginning of Altseason. And that's where we start to see things like Solana, like Sui, like XRP, like Cardano. Think about, let's say, top 20, maybe even top 15 coins, really starting to see some rotations from Ethereum, because Ethereum has now kind of seen most of its gains for the cycle. That's when we start to get into step 4, where we're looking at much smaller altcoins. We're looking at kind of, probably anything inside of the top 1,000 realistically, even some other small ones that are making insane gains, all of that type of stuff. And then I guess we could potentially throw in a possible step 5. This is one that we kind of really only saw in 2021, but I would not be surprised if it came back, particularly with what we've seen so far recently with meme coins, is we kind of got into that kind of gambly Ponzi season type of situation, where there were things that were pretty clearly, scammy, or at least questionable in terms of we weren't sure how it would play out long term, but it did seem like there was the possibility to make money short term, and so people were jumping in. So I do think that there is that possibility that we come back to that. if we do see that, that is of course going to be the point in the market where we're going to be at max greed. We're going to be seeing people do some crazy stuff, and we should definitely be quite careful. So again, we'll be updating you all the way through. If you are interested, of course, you can like and then subscribe, and then click that notification bell, as that will notify you when my videos do come out, so you can stay up to date on everything. Overall, hopefully you found the information in the video useful. Of course, you also can drop any comments, questions, thoughts, feelings, anything like that that you might have in the comment section, and I do read and respond to all of those. So if you have anything that you want me to see, that would be a great way to do so. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.